the 18th of June 1976. England, London, Black House. Sergei listened to the fading sound of Regulus' footsteps as he left the room and let out a quiet exhale. He thought he was ready for what was about to transpire, but it had all unfolded too rapidly, unexpectedly, and Sergei nearly jumped on the bed at the sudden realization. He still didn't know the time. Asking Regulus about the date felt suspicious somehow. All he gleaned from the boy's account was that it was still summer, likely during a break. "Am I a student again?" Sergei whispered, recollecting that Regulus was 2 years junior to Sirius. If his younger brother appeared around 15, then Sergei deduced that he must be about 17. Sergei had finished his 8th grade and motor school before turning 18. After that, he had entered the army, worked with machinery in a repair crew, pursued studies at the Institute of Cinematography, engaged in part-time jobs, and completed additional courses for stuntmen and stunt coordination. School seemed a distant memory now. And then there was not just any school, but a magical one. Sergei realized that wizards received education at home until the age of 11, followed by enrollment in a kind of general high school that functioned as a boarding school. This schooling spanned 7 years, with 5 being mandatory, analogous to the Soviet 8 grades. The final 2 years were akin to a technical school or the 9th and 10th grades. As per Sergei's understanding, wizards had no conventional military service, and upon turning 18 and graduating from Hogwarts, they could either enter the workforce or continue their education. Sirius had initially joined the voluntary army for a 3-year stint, but he hadn't completed it due to ending up in prison. Of course, Sirius Black, with whom Sergei had a contract, shared his memories and vocalized certain points of emphasis, but recalling everything about another person's life all at once, especially something so distinct from ordinary reality, wasn't straightforward. Sergei required a certain degree of focus to extract memories. Sometimes, these mental explanations, like with the house elf, faced a delay in perception, causing varied reactions. He realized he needed to be prepared for surprises from now on, and he shouldn't let on that he's experiencing something for the first time, instead absorbing it as life continued. Sergei concentrated and decided to begin with a rudimentary overview of Sirius's life to gain a better grasp of the situation, and to ensure he wouldn't mess up their upcoming supper, referred to as dinner here. This concern was amplified by the presence of not only his younger brother, but a teenager at that. Sergei never had a mother for as long as he could remember. He grew up in a boarding school. However, he believed in a mother's heart that could discern whether someone was a biological child or an enigmatic changeling, like himself. Regulus's accounts of family disputes had stirred something within Sergei. He held the belief that a mother's bond remained unbroken. Sergei had always awaited his mother, who, for some inexplicable reason, had abandoned him at the maternity hospital. Over his 13 years in the boarding school, he witnessed 2 instances where mothers reclaimed their children and took them home. Circumstances varied. Some faced housing predicaments, some had births prematurely and wished to conceal them, some had been deserted by the child's father and found it overwhelming to raise the baby alone without support, adding to the societal stigma. People abandoned children for various reasons, and Sergei believed his mother must have had a valid motive for her actions. There was a time when he was furious and vengeful, wanting to confront her, but he eventually let go and forgave. Much of his healing came from Natasha and her parents, who embraced him as their own, enabling him to grow and transcend his childhood grudges. Sirius's family was affluent, true capitalists, the embodiment of the decaying West, propagated throughout the Soviet era. Sergei sifted through his memories, comparing his magical life to that of Russian nobility in the 18th century. Sirius and his brother Regulus adhered to a strict study regimen from the age of about 5. They had private tutors, and Walburga, Sirius's mother, imparted some instruction as well. The boys studied grammar, reading, literature, rhetoric, etiquette, and dance. Sergei discovered that Sirius had learned to play the piano, although these music lessons ceased by the time he entered Hogwarts due to lack of instruments and opportunities for practice. Sergei knew how to play the guitar, having learned informally through the courtyard method, teaching himself through interactions with older friends in the boarding school. He later acquired songs during his army service and studies at the institute. While he didn't master virtuoso techniques, he could play Vysotsky and Vizba songs. He also had an affinity for the band, Kino, and Soy songs, which featured simple chords. Little Sirius' curriculum also encompassed magical sciences. He had already attended Hogwarts and possessed a solid grasp of simple curses, charms, and pseudo-spells such as leg-locking. The house also boasted its own laboratory, where Sirius's father, Orion Black, imparted the fundamentals of potion-making to his sons. This practice turned out to be a blend of chemistry and culinary arts. Wizards earnestly concocted various magical elixirs, reminiscent of fairy tales. Ingesting these elixirs could lead to healing, poisoning, flight, or even sprouting ears. These potions often incorporated unsavory magical ingredients like worms, cockroach legs, beetle eyes, and frog slime. Based on other people's memories, the taste of these concoctions matched the unpleasantness of the components, but they did provide benefits. The stark contrast in cultures, traditions, and overall magic left Sergei astounded. He had crafted the magic of cinema himself. However, comparing cinema to wielding a wooden wand that could actually conjure fire, water, and deadly curses felt like a world apart. Even if he had transitioned into the capitalist society, he could have managed to adjust his lifestyle accordingly. But all this mystical enchantment? It turns out that in this magical Britain, spanning England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, a subdued magical conflict had been ongoing for 3 years. Sergei was in service when the war in Afghanistan commenced, and young recruits were dispatched there, fresh out of training. The number of casualties was heart-wrenching. So many of his younger friends perished, Isashka Belaik, Romka Skochidub, Fedka Volsky, among others. His friends remained eternally youthful in monochrome photo cards, and the contents of those zinc coffins remained a grim mystery. It felt as if Sergei was watching a film about the young aristocrat Sirius. Born on the 3rd of November in 1959, he was almost Sergei's contemporary in age. Sergei's passport listed his birthdate as the 5th of November that same year. However, the boarding school had suggested that he might have been born a few days earlier, precisely when his abandonment was in progress and various documents were being processed, or perhaps his birth occurred during the night. The time may have been overlooked. Even his surname, Zvezdnev, had been bestowed upon him by the midwife due to a small star-shaped birthmark on his arm. His patronymic, Alexandrovic, was bestowed in honor of the head. It was a relief that he bore the surname Zvezdnev and not something like Bezdomny, Lostkin, or Sirotkin. For that, he was thankful. Sergei conjectured that he and Black might have shared the same birthdate. After all, he had mentioned the availability of several options. The gods weren't all-powerful, they adhered to certain laws. Sirius and Regulus had been close friends as children, often sitting in the library playing or studying together. It was a little strange to Sergei that the young wizards almost never left the manor, which was quite large, but he assumed it was because the older children had died. Or maybe it wasn't customary for mags to take their offspring out into the world at all, as the range of horrible things that could be done to a child was mind-boggling. Maybe he'd let Sasha and Luska out of the flat under guard, if some freak with a wooden stick could inflict disease, death, scourges and spoils. Sirius memories suggested that there were still birth amulets to protect children, and it was somehow easier to endure all those possible horrors. However, another possibility for locking up children could be that Muggles generally lived in a very closed enclave, hiding from ordinary citizens called Muggles. A child under the age of 11 did not have the right to carry a wand or to defend themselves, but, as memories showed, this did not prevent some young wizards from doing all sorts of strange things that might expose the existence of all these wizards. And so, in the 1960s, the newspapers were filled with advertisements about fortune-telling, conspiracies, jinxes, all kinds of magicians, Colden's healers, dodging and photo magic. In Soviet times there were none, but when perestroika began, all sorts of devils suddenly came out of every crevice. Sergei considered himself a reasonably skeptical materialist. Belief in God was not instilled, it was not supposed to be, but mysticism of all kinds happened. And filmmakers have always been a superstitious people. And here you have everything real, magic, and magicians, and a school, and a family house with lots of magical junk, and all sorts of fabulous creatures. It turned out that one of Sirius's friends was a real werewolf and turned every full moon into a mixture of wolf and man. Sergei exhaled, striving to focus on Sirius's upbringing. The weight of others' lives bore down on him, attempting to engulf him. He possessed a sixth sense that surrendering to this torrent of memories could potentially erode his own identity. Magic, it didn't align with his essence at all. What if he forgot Natasha? Sasha? Lucia? Forgot the reasons he had embarked on this journey. Taking a deep breath, as if preparing to plunge into depths, he resumed his examination of others' childhoods. Sirius and Regulus both possessed practice wands before turning 11, which then became their official wands at 11. The rather rigorous defense training administered by Wahlberger, their mother, implied something. The children were evidently being primed for the vast and perilous magical world beyond. Conversely, if one considered Tsarist Russia, the offspring of nobility were confined to their estates. It was only later, as they matured, that they were dispatched to serve in the army, pursue studies, or attend court. Such offspring, unshackled by their newfound freedom, often indulged in drinking, brawling, and fomenting various Decembrist revolts. In short, they were flush with recklessness. It seemed that Sirius had encountered a similar fate, prompting Sergei's return to the boyhood of the young Black, orchestrated by the unseen guardian.
Sirius, it's time for lunch.
A knock resounded at the door, followed by Regulus' voice. Coming, Sergei responded. His stomach rumbled, as though it had been empty all day. His heart pounded as he anticipated the arrival of Sirius's mother. Sergei proceeded slowly into the expansive corridor and, guided by his recollections, made his way to the grand staircase. Elaborate stucco, painted ceilings, artworks in gilded frames, an immense candlelit chandelier, silk wallpaper, and carpets conjured images of museums or aged mansions transformed into various cultural centers and children's hospitals, during the Soviet era. The Black House was a spectacle. Unlike his initial impressions, his memories weren't as vibrant and awe-inspiring. This disparity might be attributed to the variance in perception and life experiences. This palace certainly serves grouse now. Sergei mumbled under his breath and, squaring his shoulders, descended to the ground floor. In the corridor adjacent to the entrance of the dining room, a coffee table stood, displaying newspapers with moving images on their pages. Sergei perused an edition of the Daily Prophet, evident from the title. The date on the top newspaper read, the 18th of June, 1976. He was propelled back 20 years.
The 18th of June 1976. England, London, Black House. Every mother builds a air castle. That her child will be the most beautiful, the most intelligent, the most talented, will achieve a lot in life, will find a wonderful couple, will be happy and loved. Few mothers are ready for reality and realize that not everyone grows up to be smart, not everyone is beautiful, especially not everyone is given the chance to fully develop their talent and potential. Children can be angry, selfish, harmful, gloomy, melancholic, unstable, lazy, the most ordinary. But for some reason almost every mother thinks that her child will be flawless, because it is special, because it is her child. Some mothers are so blinded by their faith that they prefer not to see the obvious, and when, years later, the ideal being woven in their minds suddenly turns out to be completely different from what they imagined, they begin to hate their children who dared to destroy their beautiful air castle. Wahlberger Black's air castle began to crumble at the end of December in the year 1958, when her twin sons, Pollux and Castor, came down with the strongest and rarest kind of magical cold after a walk on Christmas Day and a bath in the snow. At first the symptoms were barely noticeable, the twins coughing a little, which would pass after a dose of Bodroper's potion. But after a fortnight, the fever could not be brought down and the Bodropers stopped working. The children got worse and worse. The family healer made a terrible diagnosis and gave them no chance. At best, the children would remain squibs. Their already serious illness came at the worst possible time for little magicians, between the ages of 8 and 9. The parental magic that protected the child would disappear with the illness, only faster, and the birth magic that was supposed to protect the heirs after the ritual at the age of 9 had nothing to hold on to, even if the ritual of initiation into the clan did. It was a vicious circle. Black House, like every clan manor, killed squib children between the ages of 8 and 9, unless the parents were worried about cutting them off from the clan. Pollux and Castor were about to become squibs, but were too seriously ill to be transported. The clan's protection turned against them. The twins' agony lasted until the end of January. Walburga Black was a good mother and she hoped. She believed a miracle would happen. And her boys would be cured. And they would live a long, long time. And even if they weren't the brightest or the most talented, she'd have enough to keep them alive. By the beginning of February, she was content to let her children live, at least. When her air castle finally collapsed and she realized there would be no miracle, Walburga acted like a true Black, a representative of the oldest, strongest and darkest family in magical Britain.
Mummy!
Walburga jumped slightly as she looked through the mirror at her youngest son, who stood frozen on the threshold of her room. The quarrel with Sirius and his indisposition had brought back some of the worst memories Walburga wished she could forget.
I'm sorry, did I startle you?
I was just thinking, Walburga smiled, adjusting the folds of her favorite black dress with the jabot she had changed into for dinner. The cut and style helped her keep her head up and take the blows of fate with the dignity of a lady. Is Sirius up yet?
I'm on my way over to remind him about lunch. I hope he can join us.
Regulus stopped talking but didn't walk away, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. What is it? Walburga raised an eyebrow, trying not to show her son her excitement. Regulus hadn't told her if Sirius had wanted to pack when he woke up. The youngest son had only reported that Sirius was feeling better, but after they had eaten lunch he had decided to sleep.
I think he's ashamed of his behavior. If you don't remind him or chase him away.
Regulus blushed, looked away and retreated quickly.
I'll go and remind him about lunch.
Walburga was embarrassed that Regulus was so worried. And thinking so badly of her. Sirius somehow managed to get to her so easily. Half the time. But it's hard to hold back when your own child, your own flesh and blood, the one you've sacrificed so much for, is constantly being cheeky, rude, disobedient, clingy. For every word she says, 10 in return. But if only there were stupid words. A boy renounces his bloodline, his magic, his family. How can you do that? What had gone wrong? Why had her kind, intelligent, wonderful boy, who loved his brother and his family, grown into a defiant teenager with strange ideas, for whom there were no authorities and no life guidelines? She had long since given up any illusions about her now older son, but Walburga still hoped that she could dissuade him, that she could persuade him, or even force him, if there was no other choice. Had her son forgotten all she had taught him? If Sirius left the family, he would be a blood traitor and she would have to cut him off from the clan. Magic doesn't forgive. But Walburga didn't want to think about all that and worry unnecessarily. She walked downstairs and stopped dead in her tracks as she noticed Sirius looking at the papers on the coffee table in the hall. Then her son walked into the dining room. I thought you didn't like the Daily Prophet, Walburga remarked to his back, and Sirius almost jumped up, turning and staring at her with wild eyes.
Mum.
Sirius opened his mouth and looked at her with a kind of astonishment, as if he was seeing her for the first time.
Yes. I was just thinking. I was going to. I thought I'd read the latest news.
I don't mind, read it if you want to. Walburga retreated as well, not wanting to argue in an empty place. It was only because of the newspapers that they had never quarreled. But there's a lot of abuse and agitation on both sides.
Civil wars never end well. It's always the people who suffer.
Yes. How? How are you feeling, son?
The lump is almost gone, but Regulus said I can't use magic.
Yes, the healer strongly advised against using magic for a few days, Wahlberger confirmed, touching Sirius's hair lightly and feeling the lump, which did not seem to have diminished in the slightest.
I'm sorry, Mum.
Her son whispered weakly, frozen by her actions.
Forgive me if you can.
Wahlberger froze as well, afraid that she had heard it, or that it was all just another stupid joke. What?
I'm sorry, Mum. I've been wrong about a lot of things. I'll try to be a good son. I can make it up to you.
Wahlberger promised herself she wouldn't get into another fight or scandal, that she wouldn't snap and show emotion, but she wasn't ready. Let the child not grow up as ideal as in the airy castle of dreams. It can bear it, and life, it always takes its toll. Let them stumble or not live up to expectations, but every mother believes in her child. She believes that as long as the child is alive and healthy, everything can still be corrected. There will be a moment of enlightenment, answers will come and everyone will be happy.
Come on, Mum, come on.
Sirius hugged her with one arm, the other stroking her back in confusion.
Don't cry, everything will be fine.
Yes, yes. Wahlberger sobbed quietly, pulling away from her son who had apologized so unexpectedly, something he'd never done before, except before he entered Hogwarts. A few strokes of her wand and the enchantments on her face should have hidden the fact that she had allowed herself a small weakness.
You're very pretty, Mum,
said Sirius, who continued to stare at her with a strange expression. Thank you, son. Wahlberger smiled sincerely, feeling more enthusiastic than ever. Let's not keep them waiting. Orion and Regulus must be in the dining hall by now. Lunch proceeded smoothly. Sirius made a concerted effort to recall the manners he had forsaken for years, eating almost in a rustic fashion, nearly with his hands. Wahlberger gazed affectionately at her elder son, who occasionally glanced her way as if seeking her approval. From the moment she and Sirius entered the dining room, the air seemed slightly uneasy, with Regulus also casting sidelong glances at her. Nevertheless, Regulus was always adept at showing tact, and the younger son was renowned for his keen intellect. By the conclusion of the meal, seemingly having formed his own conclusions, Regulus had grown composed and was savoring dessert, his satisfaction nearly palpable.
This is exquisite, thank you for the lunch. I think I might peruse the newspapers in my room.
Newspapers?
Orion's tone carried a hint of surprise. Sirius displayed an interest in diverse perspectives on the most recent news, Wahlberger explained. Our son has matured, I believe. Could we perhaps engage in a discussion during breakfast? She exercised caution not to inundate her eldest with abrupt changes, yet she yearned to converse with her child, to gain insights into his life, his thoughts, and his prevailing inclinations.
Certainly.
Sirius responded with a smile.
Regulus, would you mind assisting me with these newspapers? You do read them, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Regulus confirmed, eyeing his brother incredulously.
This way you can swiftly discern what's crucial and merits thorough reading, as well as what's less significant and may be perused cursorily. Unless you're occupied with other matters.
No, I'm not occupied.
Regulus exclaimed eagerly.
I'd be glad to help.
Excellent. Have a pleasant evening, Mum, Dad.
Sirius nodded, and he and his brother left the dining room.
He's transformed.
Orion chuckled as the door closed behind his sons.
I perhaps should have done this a while ago. I told you he should have faced consequences, but you were empathetic. Hopefully, it won't be for long, or he'll reconnect with his friends and...
I will converse with the Potters. I'll apprise them that Sirius is in a precarious state, advising against disturbing him. We cannot afford to lose our child. Again.